5 skills Princess Leonor mastered for the throne. Picture the marble and gold of Spain's parliament under hot television lights, the kind of light that makes every blink look like a decision. The chamber is full, the uniforms are precise, the music is ceremonial, yet you can feel the tension underneath it all, like a sealed envelope on a desk. Because on days like this, Spain isn't just watching a young woman step forward. Spain is testing whether its future can look calm in public, even when the country is complicated in private. And here's the detail almost nobody outside the corridors of power, in Washington, London, Ottawa, Canberra, or Berlin, really grasps. For a constitutional monarchy, the heir doesn't grow into the job by vibe. She grows into it by training, by discipline, by learning the skills that keep a state steady when the headlines don't. That's why the phrase you keep seeing, almost like a dare, matters more than people admit. Royal skills. Because today we're not talking about fairy tale polish. We're talking about what Spain has deliberately invested in, quietly, systematically, to protect its stability, its diplomacy, and its place in the modern world. And if you think those are just big words for a ceremonial role, then let me ask you something. When the cameras turn off, and the room empties, what exactly is an heir supposed to do to keep a country from wobbling? Hold that thought, because the first skill Princess Leonor has been mastering isn't about charm at all. It's about continuity. And it's the one that, if it ever fails, everyone notices at once. There's a reason Spain's modern monarchy is obsessed with visible legitimacy. In parliamentary systems, power is dispersed, prime ministers come and go, coalitions rise and fall, public mood shifts fast. The crown survives by doing something less dramatic, but more difficult, staying consistent without becoming irrelevant. And that's not abstract. That's muscle memory. When Princess Leonor turned 18, she swore allegiance to the Constitution in Parliament. It was a ceremonial moment, yes, but it was also a constitutional signal, broadcast to the country and to the world. Reuters reported that the ceremony underlined Spain's divisions, with boycotts by some leftist and separatist politicians, an almost perfect reminder that even a formal oath exists inside real political tension. And yet the oath still happens. The institution still shows up. The state still moves forward. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. And the heir's first job is to embody that thread without appearing to tug it too hard. Now here's the uncomfortable question that hangs in the air if you know what you're looking at. What happens if you're asked to represent unity in a room where not everyone even agrees you should exist? That's your first cliffhanger. Because this entire story, these 5 skills, were built for that exact moment. The world tends to misunderstand Spain's monarchy by comparing it to celebrity. But the monarchy's real function is closer to infrastructure. You don't notice a bridge on a calm day. You notice it when the river rises. Observers in the US and UK frame moments like Leonor's oath differently, yet the continuity echoes across continents. In Washington, people often read institutions through the lens of resilience. Can the system absorb tension and still operate? In London, the emphasis tends to be on continuity as identity. The state is a long story that keeps being told. In Ottawa and Canberra, where constitutional monarchy is experienced at arm's length, there's often a sharper focus on symbolism, what it means, what it signals, what it costs. And in Berlin, the instinct is frequently constitutional. Does the framework hold, and can it hold? Without myth. Different instincts. Same test. National identity is woven into these rituals, binding past and present in a single moment. And when you understand that, you start to see why Leonor's preparation is designed the way it is. Not to make her famous. To make her predictable in the best possible way. Skill number 1 is constitutional discipline, the ability to live inside the limits of a parliamentary monarchy and make those limits look like strength, not weakness. It sounds simple. It isn't. Constitutional discipline means knowing what you may never publicly say, even when you have an opinion. It means learning to stand beside elected leaders without competing with them. It means respecting regional complexity without looking like you're taking sides. It means using presence as a tool, showing up, listening, speaking carefully, so that the state feels continuous even when politics feel jagged. And if that sounds like a refined kind of restraint, it is. It's also a survival strategy. Because the monarchy can't win arguments the way politicians do. It can only outlast them by being steady. But here's what people miss: steadiness isn't passive. It's trained. And that leads us to skill number 2, one that's far less poetic, and far more consequential. Military formation. Not military cosplay. Not photo ops. Actual structured training across the armed forces, part of the route Spain has chosen for its heir. Leonor began mandatory military training in 2023 at the General Military Academy in Zaragoza, with the plan designed as a multi-year, multi-branch formation. Reuters noted that she started 3 years of military training that August, an institutional decision, not a personal hobby. Why does that matter? Because in Spain's constitutional order, the monarch is symbolically tied to the armed forces. That relationship is delicate in any democracy. It must communicate unity and service, never faction. The heir needs to understand the institution from the inside, its culture, its discipline, its people, without ever implying political control. That's the paradox. And it's exactly why training matters. Canada and Australia see this gesture as symbolic, but Germany interprets it as constitutional resilience. In other words, some audiences read uniforms as pageantry, others read them as a democratic state ensuring its symbols are grounded, not theatrical. And in Spain, that grounding is part of the investment. These 5 skills are not about privilege. They are the tools Spain has invested in to protect its stability, its diplomacy, and its place in the modern world. Now pause on that line, because it's the axis of everything. If a monarchy wants to remain legitimate in the 21st century, it can't be a costume. It has to look like service under constraint. So Leonor's military formation becomes more than training. It becomes a language, the state speaking to itself about seriousness. And here comes your second cliffhanger, because training in uniform doesn't only teach discipline. It teaches controlled exposure. When you live inside an institution built on hierarchy and procedure, you learn what pressure feels like before pressure is historic. You learn to sleep when you can. You learn to be observed without reacting. You learn to be corrected without resentment. And if you can do that at 19, 20, 21. What happens when the pressure isn't a drill, but a national moment? That brings us to a part of Leonor's story that looks small on the surface, but is quietly huge: her international education and cross-cultural fluency. Skill number 3 is diplomatic fluency, language, posture, and the ability to read a room without being owned by it. Before her military training, Leonor studied in Wales at UWC Atlantic College, completing an international baccalaureate environment that's deliberately global. That experience isn't about turning her international. Spain is already international. It's about giving the future head of state a working familiarity with how elites, institutions, and future decision makers from many countries are educated and socialized. You can call it networking if you want. Inside government, it's called building soft power early. And it matters because modern diplomacy is often less about treaties and more about trust. Trust built in corridors, on sidelines, in moments that never make the statement readout. In the US, that kind of fluency is often taught through universities and think tanks. In the UK, it's woven through the civil service culture and the monarchy's long memory. In Canada and Australia, it shows up as careful coalition building and international credibility. In Germany, it's often framed as institutional competence, the ability to engage without improvising your way into trouble. For Leonor, the point is not to become a political actor. The point is to become a stable interface, someone who can host, receive, and represent without creating noise. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. And there are clues, 3 of them, in fact, that help you see how these skills are being built in real time, right in front of cameras that pretend they're only filming tradition. First clue: body language under constraint. When you watch footage of high ceremony moments, parliament, national day events, military settings, the posture is never random. The stillness is a choice. The gaze is measured. The timing of a smile is calibrated. It isn't about looking friendly. It's about looking reliable. Second clue: media choreography that avoids personality cult. You'll notice something subtle in how Spain's royal household tends to present the heir. The emphasis is consistently on duty, training, and institutions, not on Leonor's opinions, not on Leonor's private life, not on turning her into a celebrity protagonist. That is not accidental. It's constitutional hygiene. Third clue: Protocol highlights that teach hierarchy without humiliation. Protocol is often mocked as old-fashioned. But inside statecraft, protocol is a method for preventing insults and managing rank. It creates a script so people don't improvise offense. Learning protocol is learning how not to accidentally damage relationships, regional, national, or international. National identity is woven into these rituals. And here's your third cliffhanger, because once you see those clues, you can't unsee what they're building toward. They are preparing her not just to appear in history, but to not break history when it gets tense. Which brings us to skill number 4, the one nobody calls a skill out loud because it sounds too clinical. Crisis containment. Not crisis management in the political sense. The heir won't run policy. But she will live alongside policy in moments when the country needs a stable symbol more than it needs another argument. Crisis containment is the ability to show up without inflaming, to express sympathy without overpromising, to be present without competing with elected leadership, to represent the state in mourning, in uncertainty, in anger, in relief, while staying inside constitutional boundaries. And it's not hypothetical. Spain has lived through economic crises, regional tensions, political fragmentation, and intense public debates about institutions. That's why the monarchy's continuity function is so guarded. The heir must be trained to absorb public emotion without mirroring it back in a destabilizing way. Observers in the US and UK frame this moment differently, yet the continuity echoes across continents. In the US, a crisis often becomes a narrative battle immediately. Who owns the story, who loses the story? In the UK, crisis tends to emphasize dignity and continuity, staying on script as the system absorbs shock. In Canada and Australia, there's often a pragmatic expectation, don't make it worse. In Germany, the instinct is institutional clarity, roles, rules, boundaries. Leonor is being trained to live inside those boundaries like they're a source of calm, not a cage. And right here, around the midpoint of our story, say the phrase again, because it's the headline people click, but it's also the core of what's happening. Royal skills. If you came here expecting etiquette tips, notice what we've actually described: constitutional discipline, military formation, diplomatic fluency, crisis containment. Those aren't accessories, they're mechanisms. And now the escalation tease, the one that changes how you see the entire project. Because there is a fifth skill that makes all the others usable. Without it, training becomes performance, and performance collapses the first time reality pushes back. Skill number 5 is controlled transparency, the modern art of being seen enough to be trusted, but not seen so much that the institution becomes fragile. This is where 21st century monarchy either adapts, or bleeds relevance. Controlled transparency means understanding media ecosystems, traditional outlets, social platforms, global commentary, without trying to win them like a celebrity would. It means allowing access and visibility in ways that reinforce service and continuity, not consumption. It means building credibility by showing work, training, learning, duty. It also means knowing what not to feed. Because the more the public consumes a royal figure as entertainment, the more it expects entertainment. And entertainment demands escalation. The institution cannot survive on escalation. So instead, you get something more subtle, a steady drip of duty, a calm visual narrative, and a disciplined absence of chaos. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Now here's the next cliffhanger, because controlled transparency sounds easy until you realize what it requires. It requires a private life that can withstand public curiosity without turning brittle. It requires a family system that can protect boundaries without looking secretive. And it requires a young heir to live with a strange contradiction, to be known by millions, yet not belong to them. So the question becomes, how do you build a public figure who doesn't become public property? That's the hidden battlefield of modern royalty, and Spain knows it. If you step back, you can see the architecture of Spain's investment. It's almost like a 5-part safeguard. Constitutional discipline keeps the monarchy from becoming political. Military formation ties the symbol of the crown to service and seriousness. Diplomatic fluency makes the heir a credible interface with the world. Crisis containment protects the state's emotional stability when politics are hot. Controlled transparency keeps legitimacy alive in the media age. And here's the part that matters most: quietly, consistently, underneath everything. These 5 skills are not about privilege. They are the tools Spain has invested in to protect its stability, its diplomacy, and its place in the modern world. Because Spain doesn't need an heir who can impress a room. Spain needs an heir who can prevent a room from becoming a rupture. Now, minute 14 territory, let's press into the question people avoid because it feels too blunt. What if the monarchy is not universally loved? What if legitimacy is contested? We already saw hints of that at the constitutional oath: boycotts, criticism, the reality that institutions are debated. Yet that's exactly why the training is structured around continuity. The monarchy cannot argue itself into relevance. It must demonstrate usefulness through restraint, service, and stability. National identity is woven into these rituals, binding past and present in a single moment. And that is why the skills matter more than the person. The person will age, change, make mistakes, recover, grow. The skills are what Spain is trying to standardize, so the institution doesn't hinge on personality alone. Here's your next cliffhanger, and it's the one that sits in the back of every serious conversation about succession. If the whole point is continuity, what happens when continuity itself becomes the controversy? Because that's the modern tension. People want stability, but they also want change. They want symbols, but they distrust symbolism. They want tradition, but only tradition that behaves like a modern public service. And that is the tightrope Princess Leonor is being trained to walk. Let's make it tangible. Imagine a future state visit: flags, anthems, careful seating charts. The Prime Minister handles the policy. The ministers handle the negotiations. The diplomats handle the text. And then there's the head of state, whose job is to make the entire scene feel legitimate, calm, and coherent. In Washington, that presence is often translated into allies. In London, it's read as continuity. In Ottawa and Canberra, it can land as shared heritage or institutional symbolism. In Berlin, it's often assessed as constitutional function. Different vocabulary, same concept, a stable face of the state. This is not just ceremony, it is the living thread of continuity. Now at around minute 19, we need safe foreshadowing, the kind that keeps us advertiser safe but still sharp. So here it is. In the next decade, Europe will keep dealing with big pressures: political fragmentation, economic uncertainty, technological disruption, and intense identity debates. Spain will not be exempt. And in those environments, the value of a head of state is often revealed not by what they do, but by what they prevent. Preventing escalation, preventing misinterpretation, preventing institutional drift. And this is where the royal skills idea becomes more than a thumbnail. It becomes a warning label. Because if these skills are not real, if they are only aesthetic, then the institution becomes fragile at the exact moment it needs to be steady. So here's that minute 19 cliffhanger. When the next true stress test arrives, one that can't be smoothed with speeches and ceremony, will the training hold, or will the world discover the difference between tradition and preparedness? Now we're in the final stretch, and I want you to listen closely to how the story resolves, because it doesn't resolve neatly. It never does with continuity. Princess Leonor is not being prepared to rule in the way people imagine from older centuries. She is being prepared to serve as the constitutional hinge between Spain's history and Spain's elected future. That's why the oath matters. That's why the military training matters. That's why the international education matters. That's why controlled visibility matters. And that's why these 5 skills are not about personal glamour, but about institutional stability. National identity is woven into these rituals. And now, because we began with it, and because it's the gravity center, we say it one more time, clearly, like a stamp on the file. Royal skills. These 5 skills are not about privilege. They are the tools Spain has invested in to protect its stability, its diplomacy, and its place in the modern world. But before you click away, here's the forward-looking cliffhanger, the one that teases what comes next, without pretending we can predict the future. Because the real test of an heir isn't the day she takes an oath. It's the first time the country needs her presence to mean something, when the headlines are loud, the politics are sharp, and the room wants a reaction. So the question I'll leave you with is this. When Princess Leonor's generation inherits a world that is less patient with symbols and more demanding of results, will these royal skills be enough to keep Spain's continuity feeling like stability, rather than nostalgia? And next time, we'll go even deeper into the one moment every constitutional monarchy quietly prepares for, but almost never discusses out loud, until it's already happening.